Now, the EU, PSOJ, and JAMP are serious about educating ordinary Jamaicans about the role that we play in maintaining accountability in our leaders. And this workshop will seek to demystify some of the aspects of how we can, how can we get involved? And it will also demonstrate the link between good governance and national development. Today, we're going to hear from a few speakers. We have, as I said before, Executive Director of JAMP, Ms. Jeanette Calder. We also have Principal Director of National Integrity Action, Professor Trevor Monroe. And from the EU, we have Mr. Frederick Ekfeld, Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation to Jamaica. We'll also be joined later by a representative from the National Health Fund, Mr. Everton Anderson, who's the Chief Executive Officer. So welcome to you all. Welcome to our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. I now invite Mr. Ekfeld to kickstart the proceedings with greetings from the EU.
What an honor. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and in particular to Mr. Everton Anderson, Chief Executive Officer of the National Health Fund, also Professor Trevor Monroe, Executive Director, National Integrity Action, and Mrs. Jeanette Calder, Executive Director of JAMP. I'm indeed the Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation. I know that my ambassador, Mrs. Maria van Steen, would have been so proud and so motivated to be here together with us today. She is still in Belgium and coming back only next week. But I must say that considering that it is my responsibility to talk at this event, I want to tell you how important it is to me to be here today. I am personal basis and through my professional life been committed to good governance, and I attach a lot of importance to the issue. So I'm extremely pleased to be here today. So as I said, it's a true pleasure to be here today to this very important seminar, Linking Governance to National Development. Very good title, I would say. I would like to take this occasion for a few brief remarks to clarify why the European Union is supporting the project Strengthening Public Stewardship and Accountability in Government, implemented by the private sector organization of Jamaica and the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, with EU co-funding. The European Consensus on Development is a key document for the European Union external action that was issued in 2017. The document is a response to the successful UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this document, the EU and its member states commit to support partner countries like Jamaica in fulfilling their responsibility to strengthen the national policies and governance for the sustainable provision of essential services and fulfillment of human rights. Governance concerns the state's ability to serve the citizens, and it refers to the rules, processes, and behavior by which interests are articulated, resources are managed, and powers is exercised in society. The way public functions are carried out, public resources are managed, and public regulatory powers are exercised is a major issue to be addressed. The future of democracy rests on good governance. Therefore, in the Consensus on Development, the European Union, its member states, commit to support domestic efforts tailored to the needs and context of each society, to build sustainable democratic states, resilient to external and internal shocks, and address the drivers of vulnerability, including inequality. The assumption is that good governance, democracy, and the rule of law are vital for sustainable development. The rule of law is a prerequisite for the protection of all fundamental rights. Effective governance institutions and systems that are responsive to public needs, deliver essential services, and promote inclusive growth. All of us who are involved in strengthening good governance should feel very motivated by this enormously important task. In this framework, inclusive political processes ensure that citizens can hold public officials to account at all levels. And indeed, this is important. Accountable and transparent institutions, participatory decision-making, and public access to information are effective tools to build trust in authorities, a necessary trust, and to make societies less permeable to conspiracy theories, rumors, and disinformation. We have all witnessed in the last year how the rise of harmful and misleading conspiracy theories, mostly spreading online, have affected the global response to COVID-19 pandemic, but also affecting national elections, political processes, the spread and the confrontation, unfortunately, with science. Governments cannot function effectively without the trust of citizens, nor can they successfully carry out public policies, notably more ambitious reform agendas. Building trust involves a process of progressive consolidation of accountable, effective, and democratic institutions and an open dialogue with non-state actors, including economic and social partners and other civil society organizations. Jutta Urpilainen, very difficult noun to pronounce. She's Finnish. My name is also difficult to pronounce. I'm Swedish. But however, Jutta Urpilainen, European Commissioner for International Partnerships, recently very wisely said, good governance and rule of law really, they help us to create fair economies, but also fair societies. They make people feel safe and heard and trusted. They also bring in investors. They open debate and encourage innovative thinking. The PSOJ and JAMP projects are contributing exactly to that. Therefore, the European Union is delighted, really delighted, to be supporting their project, and I would like to congratulate them for this initiative. And without further hesitation, I will leave the floor to many more, much more important intervention than mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ekfeldt, and I hope I'm doing your Swedish name justice. Thank you so much for those comments from the European Union. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get into the presentations now, and I'm going to invite Ms. Jeanette Calder for the first of her two presentations today. Her first presentation will focus on explaining to us just how JAMP works and setting the context for the need for a webinar of this nature. So Jeanette, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Frederick. That was really very apt. I'm going to ask you to send a copy of that over to me. I'm sure I can borrow some of that in a future conversation I'm having. But that really does set the stage in a very real and practical way for a lot of what I'm sure not only I'm going to say, but Trevor and Everton when he joins us. There are several Jamaicans, and many of them probably on the chat, who have gotten hopefully accustomed to hearing of JAMP and the perspectives that we bring, the unpacking and the drilling down that we do our best to demystify a space that has become very important to us and that we want to be of equal importance to Jamaica, and that is our parliament. But I'm not yet certain that we have done the best job of promoting and sharing exactly what it is that we do. And as Colleen said in her introductory comments and Friedrich following, we really have tried to create a tool. And a tool by definition is any instrument, usually hand instrument, that allows you to do something in a much easier fashion than if you didn't have the tool. So we created a digital tool with the assistance of the EU and very early seed funding from 8 different private sector companies to help citizens. So we were citizens thinking of citizens and basically creating something that we thought would have served us if things such as what Friedrich spoke about, rule of law, accountability, transparency, understanding what is happening, but not just understanding. I think Herman Green is here. When Herman does a story, and we get really, let's face it, a little bit of angst. We want to do something, but we don't know who to talk to. We don't know who to call. We don't know who to write. We've all been there. And so JAMP wanted to bridge the gap between the information you get from the media, the information you get from Parliament and our accountable officers to get more information and to hold them to account. So what we want to do for another, say, 5-7 minutes is to share with you just one of the trackers to give you a better idea of what it is that this JAMP tool does outside of just hearing JAMP talking on the radio or on TV or in the newsprint. So I'm just gonna take a moment here. I don't have screen privileges as yet. Yes, I now have it, thank you. To bring up my PowerPoint. And it should pretty much be on the screen now. Cloline, are you seeing?
Yes, we are.
Beautiful. Right, so I'm gonna have to cut it short today by not going through the entire tool, but I wanna introduce you to one of the 3. It's actually the tool that actually got the ideas cranking and going, and then the other 2 followed, and JAMP will be bringing on another 3 trackers in a couple of months. So in our toolbox, we really have an accountometer that really addresses the matter of the fact that government does not have much of a follow-up mechanism built into their accountability framework that follows up on a lot of the things that we don't necessarily go right. So we get Auditor General reports, what's happening in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Somebody really needs to keep their eye on the ball in order for us to correct, to remedy the situation. And failing to find that within government, we created something we call the accountometer. The MP tracker, most citizens probably would have heard about. It really took the center stage during the election. And now we have begun to build out the legislative tracker, which is really helping citizens to understand the Parliament by taking you through the entire legislative process for some key pieces of legislation. Now, this is basically where the matter began. And just to give you a little bit of background, in 2014, during the out of many concern with the NHT and the purchase of property for $180 million, we started to look at the Auditor General's reports coming out of her report that said that the NHT concern was not just $180 million, but it was a $4 billion concern by the time she was through doing her investigations. So when we started to look back, we realized that this issue, these headlines that we have gotten so accustomed to seeing Herman bring to us on the nightly news, you can see dates as far back as 1958. And I'm sure if we went even further back, we will realize that it's not a Jamaican problem, it's a human problem. And wherever there are not guardrails and guidelines in place, persons do take advantage of it. So with the help, actually, I'm proud to say, with the European Union in 2016, the Jamaica Civil Society Coalition decided that we would dig in a little bit to try and find out what is the problem? Why do we keep seeing these headlines? And with their assistance, we did a research that did expose to us as civil society actors where the gaps in the accountability system lie. Now we have a robust legislation, we have really strong institutions, and we have some dedicated technocrats, but there were some small chinks, and I'm gonna share with you in a little while how we decided to try to plug those. Now, after the report, life kind of resumed. We wrote the appropriate articles, we shared it on the TV news, we spoke about them on the air, and then after that dies down, life continues, and for the next 2 years, we continue to see more of these headlines. So what we decided to do is not sit down and wait for the government. There is absolutely no reason why citizens cannot partner, why citizens cannot support. And the Holness administration coming in from the election had made it very clear that accountability and good governance, in particular the fight against corruption, was going to be a significant plank. So we took that as a signal, and as Cloline and Frederick said, we set about to create a project where the goal was to really increase the quality and the quantity of the public goods and services, but not just that, but also increase the coverage, meaning more persons receiving good quality. How are we going to do that? We kind of really believed in the mandate of the Auditor General of Jamaica. So we thought if we could support that institution, we could see a turnaround. So the goal was to reduce waste, loss, fraud, and corruption in the stewardship of our funds and assets. And how are we going to do that? Well, folks, we boil it down to just three things. Let us, as citizens, strengthen the existing accountability mechanisms in government. We had already done the research. We had become familiar with what they were. We saw the weaknesses. How could we help? And then we would learn by doing and then turn around and share with other citizens the path that we were just treading on. So now we would in turn begin to teach other citizens about the mechanics of the accountability framework, but focusing particularly on public financial management. Accountability, guys, is this wide. So we felt if we narrow our focus on PFM, that's where we could make the greatest impact. And finally, it don't make sense, you understand, but you don't engage. There are lots of Jamaican citizens who understand, but we are not benefiting from what they know. So JAMP is also seeking to encourage and to stimulate citizens to use the information that we're sharing now to what? To improve governance, but particularly in the parliamentary space. So coming to our website, jampja.org, this is the lay of the land for now, with an additional 3 to join shortly. The Accountability Meter basically is allowing citizens, as I said before, to come to a space where you can find the Auditor General's findings in a very easy, user-friendly, not too text-heavy, not leafing through several reports. And I'm just going to show you pretty quickly how the site works. So doing a search, for instance, using the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation would have brought you to about 12 different issues that we're tracking. Here's a sample of one where the Auditor General was concerned about 1.78 billion missing from an account. JAMP's website will tell you pretty quickly what the issue is, which ministry is providing oversight, a pretty easy graphic to give you an idea as to how far the government is in terms of remedying the problem, because that's what we want to track until it is fully remedied. The Auditor General's findings summarized in easy language, which her reports already are. And of course, as Frederick spoke about, technology is here either for good or evil, but we're using it for good to allow you to share your concerns and what you find on the site with other citizens. We tell you who's the permanent secretary, what kind of breach it is, and when you scroll down, we tell you what the Auditor General's recommendation was, and we provide you with the updates that JAMP is getting from the ministries, departments, and agencies using the government's tool, the legislation they've given us, called the Access to Information legislation. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the articles and reports in the interest of time, but that tab just allows you to dig deeper into the issue and to get more information should you desire it. The tab that excites me is the Accountable Officer tab, which allows a citizen to say, okay, now I have the information, I've dug in a little bit more, now I'm ready to talk with the powers that be. And usually those 4 are gonna be the minister in charge, the permanent secretary as the accounting officer, and if it's an agency or a public body, you're gonna see who the chairman is, as well as the CEO or the managing director. So we are removing the old veil of anonymity so you know who is serving you, and you can pick and choose who it is you want to put your question to, whether you're using social media or good old-fashioned email. We also want to just quickly say before I wrap that not only looking at a breach, but this JAMP tool allows you to look at how the actual ministry is doing. So, okay, you finished looking at the NWC, and I'm very happy to say that $1.78 billion that went missing, that the NWC, on the instruction of the Office of Utility Regulation, the PAC, and the AG has returned 75% of it, and we're tracking to ensure the full amount is returned back into that account. But if you were to click on the link with the ministry, it takes you to the ministry's page where you can easily see all the breaches under that ministry that JAMP is tracking. There are 11 of them at different stages. Some are fully compliant, 7 of them are on the way, 3 of them the ministry hasn't touched. And you would see all of them below and be able to click again on the one that you just looked at. So that in summary gives you an idea of how the Accountability Meter works. We want you to come to the site, take a look at the MP tracker, take a look at the legislative tracker, interact with it. It is a tool, ladies and gentlemen. And like any tool, if you do not use it, not only if you don't take it seriously, our powers that be won't take it seriously, but any tool that's not used gets rusty. And I'm here to say, if our funders certainly see us availing ourselves of what they have assisted the PSOJ and JAMP to do, who knows? I believe that they will continue to put their efforts behind the JAMP tool, and let's see where we can take it even beyond the shores of Jamaica to import this governance tool into other jurisdictions who we really believe could also utilize something like this. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I'll see you soon on the site.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. That was very, very comprehensive. And I must say, it seems accessible and easy to use. I don't know if I'm gonna stir a little fire here, but I think an app would also be very helpful. So, you know, maybe some funding could come through for that as well.
Noted.
Yes, that would also help a lot of people who have, you know, lots of opinions on different things that are happening in the country to have it literally at their fingertips to follow what is going on with our ministries and our ministers.
Well, let me just say, Cloline, that it is what we call mobile responsive. So I'm happy to say that until we get to the app, and we have had some citizens ask us the very same, the diaspora, that was the first thing they asked of, but it is designed to be mobile responsive. So on any device, it will be relatively easy for you to use until we get to the funding for the app. Thanks.
Happy to hear. Happy to hear, Jenna.
Would it be possible to intervene just a little second here?
Sure.
Sure. A very short question. I mean, I am the JAMP portal is truly an important instrument, and I'm sure that students in political science at UE and other universities will find it extremely interesting. However, education about our political systems start already at the earlier stage. Has been any effort to promote JAMP to high schools, to students in 16, 17-year-olds? They are the ones who should learn about Jamaican politics and how it functions and how people can be held accountable.
Absolutely, I agree. Noted. Thank you, Frederick. So we're gonna have to make an extra push in that direction for our engagements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a great suggestion, Frederick. We're going to head into our second presenter for the morning. Our next guest is the Principal Director of National Integrity Action, and NIA, who we hear about and we see the ads on TV, is one of another body in Jamaica who's about transparency and accountability. It's a local anti-corruption body. So I'm going to ask Mr. Trevor Monroe to lead us into his presentation.
Thank you very much, Cloline. I appreciate your words of welcome. And may I also say how much I would want to congratulate Jeanette and JAMP and PSOJ for arranging this particular seminar. And of course, our friend Frederick from the European Union, who we have an opportunity to meet on a number of occasions similar to this. In congratulating you, I want to say how much we appreciate the theme that you have chosen, the theme of linking good governance to national development. It comes at a time when there is much questioning at home and abroad of how good is Jamaica's governance and how much is our national development proceeding as well as it can and should. As we are all aware, the levels of inequality revealed in the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, the issue of gender-based violence, the inadequate responses, all of this has raised in people's minds whether and how far we're doing what we ought to. And therefore, the topic of this seminar is extraordinarily timely. In beginning my presentation, I would like to stress, however, that when we have these doubts, we need to recall how far Jamaica has progressed and how much in the past we have recovered almost from the precipice. I'm thinking of how far we are in relation to press freedom. This week we celebrate World Press Freedom Day. Jamaica is uniformly ranked in the top 10%. We're now number 7 of all the countries of the world. And with much respect to Frederick, ahead of many of the European democracies. ahead of the UK and the United States when it comes to freedom of the press. This is something we need to remember and to cherish. We need to recall that we were among the worst in the world when it came to electoral administration. Now we're among the best. We pulled ourselves up, we pulled ourselves back with citizen participation and with appropriate qualities of leadership. We had an election in 2016 where the winning party won by less than 0.5% of the popular vote. Nobody stormed Gordon House. There was not even a protest, not even a signal of discontent. The transition took place easily. And of course, we pulled ourselves back from the fiscal cliff to be now among one of the most important countries practicing fiscal prudence. So when we look at how far we have performed or are underperforming now, let us remember that we have been there before in the past. We've come back from the precipice to become among the best in the world. And right now, as we say in Jamaica, knock wood, our management of COVID-19 seems to be trending in the right direction. So linking good governance to national development should not be anything new to us. 12 years ago, we as a society, after the most comprehensive national consultation, developed Vision 2030, Jamaica's National Development Plan. In that Vision 2030, 2009, we read in National Outcome number 6, and here I quote, "Effective governance is fundamental to the development of the society. Strong and accountable institutions, political commitment to effective management of the state," which Frederick mentioned, "transparency in government, a justice system accessible, fair equity, respect for human rights, and very importantly, 12 years ago, a vibrant civil society balancing the power of government." So we said that in 2009, but regrettably, we have seriously underperformed on the indicators, the targets that we set ourselves, and hence we have underperformed massively in terms of national development. For example, of the 67 national indicators that we set ourselves in 2009, in 2018, one of the most recent assessments that I've seen by the PIOJ, we were meeting only 25%, 1 in 4 of those targets. We're doing very well on some, like life expectancy. We showed improvement over the baseline year, 2007 and others, but most of all, we were worse than the baseline in 2018, 9 years after the National Development Plan. We were worse than the baseline in our country's murder rate. We were worse than the baseline in the percentage change in export earnings. We were worse than the baseline in respect to environmental performance. And we have to bear in mind the issue of dry harbor is now before the courts to see to what extent that mining permit, it violates our fundamental right to a full and productive environment. One of the reasons why we've underperformed comes very close to why NIA and JAMP exist. Our citizens have been insufficiently educated, insufficiently assertive, insufficiently able to hold the authorities to account. And therefore, many promises have gone untouched, and underperformance has been the result. We have underperformed not just in our own eyes, but in important international indicators. I mentioned 3, the Corruption Perception Index, where we're in the bottom half, 50% of the countries, 2/3 of the countries in the world actually are underperforming. We're in bad company. The Human Development Index, look at Jamaica's human resource capability and potential. We rank number 101 out of 189 countries. We don't belong there. The Global Competitiveness Index, 79 countries are more competitive than we are. And 2 of the reasons for that in the Global Competitiveness Report is the extent of corruption, the degree of crime, and importantly, the extent of cronyism in allocation and award of public contracts. Most distressing to me, and I'm sure to you, is the very recent published report, the Commitment to Reduce Inequality. As you know, the commitment to reduce inequality is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, to which we signed on, like so many other countries in the world, in 2015. Jamaica ranks, ladies and gentlemen, 120 of 158 countries in relation to our commitment to reduce inequality. Completely unacceptable. One element in that is the inadequacy of public services to the masses of the people, and there are others that we can talk about. The International Monetary Fund, which has appropriately been praiseworthy of Jamaica's performance in their 5th review of the Standby Agreement in April 2019, made an observation that I ask us to note well, and I quote, "Jamaica fares relatively poorly on corruption-related measures with potentially significant implications for growth." It is against that background and the noticeable inadequacy of citizen awareness and assertiveness that one of the responses to this continuing situation has been the formation and the establishment of civil society organizations. Amongst them, of course, is JAMP, a National Integrity Action, which was established in 2012, with very important, and we need to acknowledge the extraordinary support we have received over the years from the European Union. We thank the governments and people of Europe, from USAID, from the UK DFID, from Transparency International within recent times, and of course of significance as well, businesses in Jamaica's private sector. Some of them very, very sustained and consistently have supported us over the last many years. Without that, we would not have been able to advance our mission to build public awareness, to build citizen assertiveness, most of all through the media, but also on the ground in the communities, in the schools and educational institutions. And we're happy to say that this has not been a waste of time, or sometimes we feel demoralized. We haven't gone as well as we would have liked, but the outcomes are there for us to see from the surveys that have been done over the years. One of them, the reduction in tolerance of bribery and bribe taking amongst our citizens. Very significant. In 2006, 57% of Jamaica's population was tolerant of bribery. That went to 26% by 2017. Developing integrity programs, one of the most successful in our view amongst young people, integrity clubs in schools. That is one area that I wish we would be able to garner enough resources to resume and to sustain getting to the youngsters at that stage, not just in the schools, but in the communities with violence reduction programs that we have been working with. Very significantly, our advocacy of anti-corruption laws and institutions. Campaign finance is one such. Clearly needs to be improved. Disclosure needs not just to go to the Electoral Commission, but to the public, but the law is a pathbreaker for the Caribbean. And of course, the Integrity Commission, which also is an important advance, but they themselves have pointed out changes that are needed to make their operation more transparent and to engage the public more effectively. Finally, I mentioned very effective partnerships with other civil society organizations like JAMP, Capri, and perhaps the feather in our cap, the flagship, with our justice sector. Hundreds of training sessions with investigators, with prosecutors, with sensitization sessions with parish court judges, Supreme Court judges, and at the appeal court level. And of course, that continues up until very recently. All of this tells us, though, given that we are doing what we can, but it is far less than what is needed, it's a time for more urgent action. More needs to be done by NIA, by JAMP, to strengthen good governance and national development. It is important to learn, I would suggest, from one arm of our state, which has done very well within recent times. I refer to the Judiciary. What the Judiciary did is, first of all, to develop a strategic plan between governing the region 2018 to 2023. And they set a goal to become the best in the Caribbean in 6 years and the best in the world. And they did not just set a goal, but they set milestones and indicators. Every single quarter, you go on the Supreme Court website, and you say statistics related to the indicators. One of them is the case clearance rate. That is the number of cases disposed of for every 100 new cases. And I'm happy to say, just reviewing the recent performance, the statistics which are published quarterly show that initially, that case clearance rate indicator took a big hit from COVID. Quarter 2 of 2020, the case clearance rate went down to 51%, went up to 78, then to 121 in quarter 4. So that 2020 ended with an average case clearance rate of 96, which is above the international standard of 90 and above the target set for that year of 95. So we can and should perform better when we lag in the way that so many others sections are lagging in our governance arrangements. So I suggest it is crucial to develop guidelines. It is crucial to conduct training to build capacity, which is where NIA has worked very well with the justice sector. And it is crucial to measure your performance against clear indicators. I suggest at this moment, this morning, that other sections of our government have 3 co-equal branches, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. I think that the situation requires the legislature to follow suit. The legislature needs to develop a strategic plan for it to better fulfill the obligations imposed on it by our Constitution and by the requirements of good governance. I suggest that this should have indicators and targets for each fiscal year, and I mentioned 5. 1, from 2009, our Vision 2030 plan stated, and here I quote, guidelines with appropriate sanctions, as well as roles and responsibilities of members of parliament to ensure effectiveness and accountability. We are now in 2021. We're 9 years away from 2030 when Vision 2030 expires. It is now time, no longer enough to talk. It is now time to act, especially in the light of recent revelations of how impotent we as a population are in relation to the existing rules to remove parliamentarians who, on the face of it, are guilty of gross misconduct. The impeachment legislation, now happily advocated by NIA and by JAMP, is now a parliamentary resolution, and that is something that should be acted on promptly. So that's the first thing. We need to develop guidelines, including a code of conduct, and legislation which may need to change the Constitution, such as impeachment. Secondly, the strategic plan needs to focus on improving the numbers of laws passed as a percentage of the legislation agenda. Every year, if you go on the Cabinet Secretary's website, you'll see a legislation agenda of 50, 60, sometimes 70 items. At the end of the year, 30 or 40 laws are passed. This is unacceptable. We need to return to a situation as we did in the regime of 2007 to 2011, where the Prime Minister sets priorities. In this case, I suggest that the Public Management Accountability Act regulations, which would make the appointment to public boards based more on merit, on experience, expertise, and performance, and less on cronyism, that this regulation, which went before the Parliament, actually passed by the House, to the credit of the Minister of Finance, has stalled. We need to get that moving. We need to do what was done with the board of the Bank of Jamaica, commendably. Establish continuity across administrations that needs to apply to all the public boards and bodies. The Crime Management Oversight Committee priorities agreed on by both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition then in 2012, that also needs to be brought into the priority legislative agenda. Point number 3, we need to table, debate, and act on important reports within 30 days of submission. For example, the Integrity Commission report, its annual report, It's now the third year, the second annual report, the first annual report made suggestions, recommendations to the Parliament that the levels of transparency in the legislation needs to be enlarged, that the statutory reports by public officers needs to be strengthened. It has not yet been debated. This is absolutely unacceptable. And to that extent, I repeat what was in the Jamaica Labour Party manifesto of 2016. Within 30 days, reports from the Auditor General, reports from sessional committees of Parliament need to be debated, and where necessary, legislative proposals developed to deal with whatever issues are required to be rectified. Number 4, we must increase the number of sittings of Parliament. I suggest by 50%, allowing more time for private members' motions, as well as questions and answers. When you look at the data, the hours that Jamaica's Parliament meets, the Senate and the House of Representatives, pale in comparison to comparable jurisdictions. One afternoon on a Tuesday for the House, on the Senate Friday. You look at what happens, the number of sittings per year in Ghana. You look at the number of sittings per year in India. You look at the number of sittings per year in the UK, 150. We average about 40 to 50 sittings per year. This is not acceptable and cannot be adequate to deal with the constitutional commitment that the Parliament must pass laws for the peace, order, and good government of Jamaica. Number 5, I propose that this strategic plan ought to have in it the need to improve and sustain a more appropriate gender balance within our Parliament. The minimum is 30% established by our international bodies. We need to go well beyond that in the way that the South Africans have, or those in Rwanda. So we need urgent action, no longer talk. Prime Minister Holness himself in his inaugural speech in 2016 put it this way: the Jamaican people want to see action in building trust. Why? We're at an all-time low in levels of trust and confidence in our governance institutions. Percentage of the electorate voting in 2020 was the lowest ever and continued a downward trend. The satisfaction with democracy, 32%, according to the most recent report by LAPOP, and deeply disturbing, all-time high in the justification, again revealed by surveys, of military coup to deal with crime and corruption, 58% for the former and 65% for the latter. This cannot be an acceptable situation. We are in a dangerous position, and therefore we need to pull back. If we don't want to look at the survey data, listen to the reggae artists, listen to some of the conscious words. Bounty Killer, 1996, poor people fed up with all the system shag up, 1996. 2018, Protege, looking at Jamaica now, injustice in the place now. If what you see now really fails you, then you are the problem where we face to. Well, JAMP, NIA, PSOJ, citizens' bodies across this country need to be part of the solution. We need to assert ourselves more, even when we feel nothing will come of it, because our experience shows on a number of occasions within recent times that when we speak out, when we stand up, when we sustain it beyond the 9-day wonder, then targets can be achieved, and the underperformance in both good governance as well as national development will be a thing of the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Monroe. Those are some very sobering statistics, some sobering figures that you're sharing with us. There's a lot of work to be done. I mean, you're right, we're less than 10 years away to Vision 2030, and we're way more than 10 years behind achieving the targets related to Vision 2030. So between the PSOJ, NIA, JAMP, EU, we all have a lot of work to do. And that is why webinars like this are really important, because we can get more people being a part of the solution, more people seeing the role that they can play in making things better and holding our leaders accountable and really striking those targets so that we can truly develop sustainably as a country. But while it's sobering and we are tracking behind, there are some entities and there are some people who are putting in the work and are doing the things that are to be done. We have with us today from the National Health Fund, the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Everton Anderson, and he'll be making a brief presentation to us today to tell us what the NHF is doing in their governance practices as a public body. And we thought of inviting the NHF. Why? Well, NHF is a 3-time winner of the PSOJ Ministry of Finance Public Bodies Corporate Governance Awards. And in fact, less than a month ago, they were awarded the overall winner again for 2020. And they were the winner of the Greta Bowles Award for Excellence in Corporate Governance. So congratulations, Mr. Anderson. You're clearly doing something right at NHF, and we would love to hear more about what it is that you are doing, so we can perhaps, shed some light and provide a framework for other entities to follow, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector.
Thanks, Colleen. Good morning. Hope you're well. Morning, Jeanette, Trevor.
Good morning, Everton.
Really, everyone online, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. For those who may not be familiar with the NHF is an agency of the Ministry of Health with specific responsibilities of providing support to the health structure in Jamaica, particularly through supporting persons who are affected by NCDs and making medication more affordable to the population. That was really the genesis of the NHF. And subsequent to that, the fund has taken on other programs to improve the health sector in Jamaica. The most recent one being the procurement and management of pharmaceuticals for the country, which has been a huge task, especially during this COVID era. So it's a big agency. We do a lot of work. And I think we have to thank the staff and the board for the work that goes into making the NHF work. In the era of governance, I'll just briefly go through our experience, and I think governance came strongly to the table. And I'll share the few slides I have now. In 2017, post-disabled participant screen sharing. Is that you, Colleen?
Hold on, we'll label that for you.
All right, thank you so much. Right. So we started a few years ago being very strong in governance because there was a recognition that there were significant gaps in the agency that we needed to address. Some of these gaps were policy gaps in that our whole policy agenda was not clearly defined, and our policies in many cases were not documented in a way that we could share with staff and board members. The issue of corporate secretary really did not have a corporate secretary back then, so that was a major gap in terms of our governance procedures. We're not fully compliant with the corporate governance framework for public bodies, and to be truthful, there are very limited discussion on governance issues. It was just not a topic that persons felt comfortable discussing or felt that it was a topic that needed to be discussed. And I think once you're not willing to discuss clearly issues of governance, and I don't think any organization, whether public or private, can enter into a period of growth, because that's a very important topic, because it really defines the agenda of any public body. So these are the major gaps that we faced back in 2016-17, and we acknowledged them and started moving in a different direction. So in terms of the steps that the NHF has taken, we started with engaging corporate secretarial services through Camille Facey. And then we employed our own corporate secretary, Mrs. Hillary Hutchinson, and both ladies have played a major role in pushing the issue of governance and getting things right at the agency. The board training was also another big thing because it is traditional for boards to receive one-off training when a board is set up, but we took it to a different level by having a more strategic approach and ongoing training of board members. It was just not a one-off. In fact, we're at a stage now where we have a training plan for our board members, similar to us having a training plan for persons who work in the agency. So that dictates what happens in any given year as it relates to training courses, and it really looks at gaps in specific members, and the aim is to really fill those gaps. In terms of gap analysis that had to be done as it relates to the corporate governance framework and other best practices globally, to look at where NHF was and where we needed to go. So there had to be a major look at that, because that then defined the specific actions that needed to be taken, the policies that need to be revised, those that had to be written from ground zero, and an acknowledgement that there are agencies across the world that were doing things well, and even in Jamaica that were doing things well, that we needed to learn from and to act on. So those were the major steps that we took, and that led to a number of policies being revised and updated. We have done a lot of work in terms of having these policies documented, the board charter, the board induction process, which is so important in our context, that people in their onboarding are clear as to roles and responsibilities. Things like a conflict of interest register, corporate social responsibility framework, unpopular documents such as a whistleblowing policy, which is very important, and a slew of policies, and a lot of work went into documenting these policies. But I think the bigger thing for us is when we documented, we had to ask ourselves, how do we bring these policies into life? Because like other documents, these documents can be in files, they can gather dust, and they really don't benefit the organization. So we had to then develop a strategy of getting not only the board, but staff members to understand all the policies over time, the fundamentals in each policy, because I think that is very important in the context of what we do. And we have, even in our day-to-day operation, we have our communication protocols on Fridays, which involves a news report. So we would share those policies during those news reports to staff, pick out key aspects, and not only those, but things that are emerging. So if there are things happening with sexual harassment, we share those in our broadcast on Friday, and we use various strategies to share the information so people begin to understand and appreciate how we have operationalized, and the need for us to not only have these as paper documents, but as things that we're knowledgeable about at the level of the board and at the level of staff and management. So we have regular discussions at the Corporate Governance Committee, and I think that's a critical committee of the board, because it really affords us the opportunity to discuss governance issues, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, and then move those up to the level of the full board. And the sensitization I mentioned earlier is important. I think one of the critical things though is doing your annual gap analysis, because even though you would have done a major one to get your policies right, things change situations change, people change, systems change, and it's important to do a formal look every year to see what your gaps are and what needs to be fixed, and then have a plan based on that. So we are happy to have that in place as part of our agency operation. And the other thing we've done is put in place a team for what we call environmental scanning as it relates to governance issues, subscribing to the best magazines globally that cover governance, and also just looking at what's happening, and then we present on those at the right time to board members on these key issues. And it also provides an opportunity for a corporate secretary to stay fully abreast of what's happening on governance globally. So we really tried to make it something that becomes a daily practice in our operation. In terms of the benefits to the NHF, I think we have become a more accountable and transparent agency, and we really pushed the issue of integrity at the board and at the level of management, and indeed to every staff member, pushing the concept that we all have some responsibilities to fulfill in the context of our work environment, whether it be a janitor, whether it be the CEO, whether it be the chairman, we all are accountable. And I think one of the big things for us is really just meeting the statutory requirements and meeting the performance requirements. And at the NHF, we have targets for both the board and management, because that really pushes transparency. So CEO and management have targets for the year, their objective targets, and you're scored based on those targets. The board also has performance targets, and we work towards achieving those targets. So I think we have become a more open and transparent agency in terms of how we operate. I think the awareness of corporate governance has improved for both board and staff. As I mentioned earlier, pre-2017, it was just an issue that was on the side, so to speak. It's now a main issue for the board and for staff, in that through committees and the board, it's always on the table, and people are now more aware through onboarding and ongoing training as to the governance issues. I think one of the things that we appreciate is a willingness to openly discuss corporate governance issues, because I think I mentioned earlier, I don't believe any agency can improve if you're not willing to discuss those uncomfortable governance issues as a part of your improvement process. Because it's important that if I have a problem, I can, in my capacity as CEO, I can say, this is an issue I'm facing, and we agree on a pathway to resolution, or any member can raise any issue around governance. In terms of our organization, I think one of the things I've noticed is that the team generally, they're very motivated to do a lot of things right. So people now focus a lot on not only the content of annual report, but they want it to look good. Nobody wants their reports to be late. So it's really everybody on board now trying to get the best out of the entity. People bringing new ideas to the table. You'll have people come and indicate to you, oh, I was reading this document and the issue of risk management came up, and I believe this is how we can improve our risk management framework. So we keep having ideas for improvement, and I think that leads to the point of a commitment to continuous improvement, because we have clearly recognized that while we have made steps forward, there still needs to be a lot of work as it relates to how our agencies govern and how corporate governance is practiced generally in the public system. So we are clear that the good corporate governance is a journey and not a destination. And we are happy to be on this journey, and we are committing to continuing to excel at corporate governance, to face the tough issues, because if you don't do that, you cannot improve, you cannot get better. And our sincere hope is that the NHF will become a lot better, and that other agencies can become a lot better, because the quality of public services, the accountability for the significant funds that government spends, all of that is dependent on good corporate governance. So we are committed to playing our parts. While awards are nice to win, I think the ultimate aim is for a public service that delivers to the people of this country. So we thank you again for inviting us, and our commitment remains to continue on this journey and to really work to improve the NHF and to help in any other agency that we can. So I thank our board and our management team for our continued focus, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue with the PSOJ, the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, who have been champions in this cause, and all the other agencies that continue to work for good governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. That was a very, very comprehensive presentation, giving a very clear and simple, succinct way, our framework for other companies or other entities to achieve good corporate governance practices or principles. I have one question for you, and that's in relation to how did the corporate governance improvement, how did that translate into the success for the overall fund? Did you see improvement in the delivery of your mandate because of the improvement in your corporate governance?
Yes, I thought I mentioned that. I think overall, what it did, it sent a message to every team member that you're expected to deliver something, because believe it or not, you still have gaps in terms of persons not accepting that they're at work to deliver something for the salary that they receive. And I think every team member now, even if they question it, is more willing to accept that. And I think that's big. And the ideas we get and the things that are generated, a lot of it comes from the staff, because people not only want to do better, but they want to be more efficient. So if you look at the pharmacy services that we have been asked to manage, I mean, it's a lot of innovation that has gone into it. We started medication delivery during COVID as a result of staff saying, we're accountable to these persons, they're at home waiting to get their medication. Some cannot come out, so we have to do something. So we started with staff volunteering to do deliveries, and then we have expanded that to other persons doing delivery. But it's a journey, and we have to continue on it if we believe in this Jamaica that we are living in. And I personally have no intention to go anywhere, so I want to play my part to make Jamaica the best it can be.
Co-sign that, definitely, Mr. Anderson. Thank you so much for your time. I know you didn't have a lot of time this morning, so we really appreciate you sharing with us for the time that you've been here, and we hope you can stay on for the rest of the presentations.
Sure.
All right, thank you. All right, before we head into our final presentation for the afternoon, I'm just going to ask, I know that we've had a number of presentations so far today. We'll be taking questions at the end, but feel free to type your questions in the chat that you may have now. We can see how best we can address them as we proceed, and we can also tackle some of them at the end of the morning. But without further ado, I'm going to hand back over to Jeanette for her second presentation, just pulling everything together that we would have heard today from EU, from NIA, talking about the global perspective, talking about where we are as a country, where we need to be, talking about the practical things that entities can do, that we can do as people, and how can we have national development through good governance. Jeanette, over to you.
Unmute. Thank you very much, Cloleen, and everyone. I don't know. I was okay with being the last speaker until I heard Everton. It was just so good. I feel like I'm gonna be a bit of a downer. But Trevor set a really wonderful stage, digging into a lot of good things that's going for Jamaica. He talked about our strong democracy, and then he really came around at the end and showed us how we really need to strengthen and tighten up, and really left us recognizing that the things that he has identified as areas that we can improve in are all doable. None of them are really beyond us. And then Everton came along, Cloleen, and demonstrated that what Trevor is saying, I saw it go. And right before I switched over, I saw Carol's text. Everton, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's endorsing the fact that you give excellent, actually the word was outstanding customer service. So I thank you. But maybe it's not such a bad thing that Cloleen, in her wisdom, placed Everton where he did, because as I go into digging a little bit more into the granularity of the issue of accountability and how we want to link it to national development, I think it was good that we start on a note of being very clear that it can be done. And to a large extent, it is about will. So without any further, I'm gonna just pull up my presentation here and ask you to stay with me for another 20 minutes while we look at public sector accountability, linking good governance to development. As you can see from my little icon there, I have the crosshairs on tracking, because that's at the heart of what we do. And monitoring and oversight is crucial, coming away from what Everton said. Everton, I'm going to ask Cloleen to set up a meeting with us. I have so many questions, it don't even make sense to start. I have to come and get a real, drilling down with you, and I'm looking forward to that. But let us make sure that we're starting on the same page of what is governance. I don't want to assume that we mean the same thing when we hear these words, no matter how often they're used. I like this definition. I should have really said here what the source of it is, and I'm forgetting at this point in time, but it says here that governance is about the culture and the institutional environment. You heard Everton talk about the shift and how they were changing the culture in the NHF. So it's about more than the NHF though. We're widening beyond it to talk about the environment within which citizens and the public stakeholders interact among each other to participate in public affairs. But I want you to think about the fact that governance is also something you do at home. Each and every one of us coming from different homes where there are different rules of engagements. Mom and dad have different rules about money. They have different rules about how they discipline, different rules about how they make decisions as a family. Some families have family meetings, they gather, it's a consensus. Some, it's the father's voice, it reigns, and that's that. That is a governance environment. So let's pan a little bit out to the society. We're all in this island home. I have one home, it's called Jamaica, that's my address. We're all in it together. And the question is, how do we interact and how do we make decisions for the good of the society, creating a tomorrow in a way that is, well, let me tell you how. I think Frederick pointed out what he considered to be good governance. So we're gonna move a little bit from just what is general governance to what is good governance. Now, someone was kind enough to share this definition with me about a night or two ago, and I think it's apt. It says the World Bank in 1992, in its report, they come up with a report every year on governance and development. They posited that good governance consists of the following. And think about Jamaica, think about the news, think about all you know about our island as you look at what they say the components of good governance are. It's the capacity and efficiency in the public sector management of our affairs. It is accountability, which is getting information on who did what, why, where, when, and how much. And if it didn't go the way it's supposed to go, do we hold them to account? Are there consequences? The legal framework, are there laws in place? And to ensure there is no chaos, but order, and also laws that speak to those same consequences if things don't go the way it should. And information, how easily can you access it? And how transparently is that information provided? Now, the question is, at the end of that, we don't have the time, but I would love to know what you think, which is, are we there yet? And if we're not there, and those are the goals, how are we going to close the gap? Now, we've gotten a glimpse of it already from the two presentations, but I want you to bear these pillars in mind. Other development agencies says these are the 8 pillars of good governance: transparency, accountability, responsiveness, government's responsiveness to you, the rule of law, how stable is our environment, equity and inclusion, pretty close to the last one, broad-based empowerment, broad-based participation, and last but by no means least, how empowered do you feel in the space, in the process of decision-making in government? How involved do you think you are? Now, starting on a bit of good news, Jamaica has really been doing splendiferously, reasonably well, even I would say during COVID, but certainly before. This is not me speaking. This is actually the Honorable Minister, Nigel Clark, back in 2018. Looking back and recognizing that as where debt was concerned, fiscal health or interest rates, unemployment, inflation, job growth, with all of these indicators, we were doing well across successive administration in terms of making sound financial decisions, yeah? So with all of that going for us, then the question is, why am I here to talk about accountability, and in particular, fiscal accountability, public financial management? Simply put, in spite of all of this, Jamaica is still suffering, I put it to you, from leakages that need to be plugged in terms of losses sustained to the public purse. Now, with all of that going for us, can you imagine what this country would look like if we begin to plug the holes? And if you say, what holes? After coming on the heels of Everton, I don't need this slide. This slide is a slide I look at from time to time to inspire me. It will almost be in every presentation I do, because this was a slide that says, when all was said and done, and the IMF arrangements had come to an end, sort of, look at the headlines and what they had to say about what Jamaica accomplished. When 6 years before, nobody in or out of the island thought that we could pull off what looked like the insurmountable. So this slide tends to remind me that the problems that looked intractable can actually be surmounted when we all put our minds to it. Now, the last little piece of that slide, though, is very important, because despite what the IMF said about Jamaican unqualified success and the accomplishments under the IMF, on departure, they did point out that what we need to look to next was the shortcomings in work governance, environment, and arrangements. So I want to put it to you, hearing what Everton had to say about once you're intentional about what you want, once you have the supporting, and I loved when he said a while ago that from the CEO to the, I think he said the janitor, ancillary staff, everybody had a role to play and everybody had to own it. And I also paid attention when he said that part of the challenge in the beginning was just trying to get people to understand that them have a work and they're getting money and they need to deliver, and that's what they come to work to do. That's a psyche and a culture that he had to work on, that people didn't know that when you come to work, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. So it goes back to will. There was clear will in the National Health Fund, and what we want to see is that expanded right throughout the public sector. So I want to share this slide with you that looks at identifying political will. When we talk about political will here, I'm not speaking solely of the politician. Political actors expand beyond that. These are all the people who impact the political decision-making process. So that's the media. That's you and I, that's the private sector. There are some individuals in this country that even just as an individual, they are a political actor. But certainly our parliamentarians and our politicians are our main stakeholders. So I just want to run through quickly and ask you to, not going to do the analysis for yourself, for you. I want you to think about it and decide for yourself, where do you think we are in terms of the political will to actually close the gaps in accountability in Jamaica? Now, domestic origin of initiatives, what am I referring to there? It has to do with the question of how much are the initiatives that are fighting corruption and improving accountability now, whether or not they are homegrown, whether or not we are doing what we need to do because we're under pressure from some external influence. Let's say the International Monetary Fund, who really did come and require Jamaica to put certain ducks in a row legislatively from a governance standpoint. And did we really own it? That's the question. So that when they're gone, to what extent can we continue to run with this? A high degree of problem analysis. Do you get the feeling that the government of Jamaica has really dug down into the issue of corruption as one issue of poor accountability to find out what is it that is causing what we call aberrant behaviors on the part of some political official? What is the incentive for them to act in a way that robs the Jamaican people and the public purse? How far do you think we have drilled down into that, and having drilled down, have put certain things into place now to create an incentive to work against that? Participation is crucial. Going again back to what Everton said, all hands had to be on deck in the National Health Fund. You had to have strong leadership, but all hands had to come on deck. Now the question is, to what extent do you see or do you feel, some of this is just what's in your gut, that for instance, our watchdog agencies are working together? Many of us have heard this phrase called joined up government a lot. I know when I was in government, I heard it a lot. But what we found out of our 2016 research into accountability is, for example, the Auditor General is an excellent place for our watchdog agencies to start to figure out where the problems lie in government. And what we found out is that they were not availing themselves of very rich information in any of these reports, which meant that they're really not coordinating and working together. There's not a baton changing from what the AG finds to what MOCA picks up and runs with to the Integrity Commission and the others. So the high level of participation is certainly an indicator there in terms of the political will. The inclusion of prevention and education, certainly. We talk a lot about prosecution, but before we get there, the question as to whether or not we're investing enough in preventative measures, again, starting with the seemingly small findings in an Auditor General's report is a preventative way of approaching it. And the inclusion we talked about, the education, extending that understanding to citizens. Is there an intentionality behind the government wanting to teach, using the PBCJ? Certainly, I commend them for what the Ministry of Education has done in funding that. But what about the Jamaica Information Service? Can we do more? Objective monitoring. That's a mouthful, which I will get to in a little bit, in a little while, but that has a lot to do again with our oversight agencies, but also teaching citizens to understand that at the end of the day, you and I are the final checks and balances. Yeah, not the Parliament, not the Auditor General, but to what extent have we been empowered? We complain about civics not being in school anymore. Was that a deliberate decision, and why? I applauded the Ministry of Education to hear last week in our sectoral presentation, I think it was earlier this week, that they will be taking measures to put that back into the system. And last but by no means least, the question of how much resources is being dedicated to the issue of public accountability. Now it brings me to the next slide. What we have here are the 7 main watchdog agencies. And remember, these agencies exist primarily to ensure that other public servants are doing their jobs, yeah? Now, a quick scan of that should give you an idea as to what the total is, but in the interest of those of us who don't add fast, that is not a small amount of money that the taxpayers are spending on what we call watchdog agencies of government. When we did our initial research in 2016, it was 2.5 billion. And therefore, in 4 years, it has more than doubled. The question I want to leave you with is, do you believe that you are getting value for money from all of these agencies? And if not, what can you and I do to change that? Now, Trevor dug a little bit into some of the problems that we're having and what we need to fix. And I just want to, for the next couple of minutes, just to share with you at a very granular level, the problem that is facing us in terms of public accountability. And I chose the Ministry of Labor and Social Security because this ministry is what I would consider to be a repeat offender. The challenges that the Auditor General and the PAC and the Parliament is having extends back, I would say, our 2016 research started in 2010, and the ministry has consistently been a significant contributor to the Auditor General's reports. Now remember, the AG's reports only lists breaches. So if you don't see someone in the report, that's a good sign. To be found in the report is automatically not a good sign. So I'm not gonna go back too far, but I wanna go back just 2 years to indicate to you the kinds of problems that we're grappling with, to demonstrate to you that these are not problems that are insurmountable, and then to leave you with a question as to what what is it that we as citizens can do to help to close the gap? Now just follow me for a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen. It says here, let me close this window so that I can see. 2017-18, so I'm only going back 2 years. Just picture for a moment that we have allocated $49.2 billion to a ministry, not that we can afford to waste money in any ministry, but when you really think about it, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security is certainly the ministry that I would want to extract every dollar out of when you think of who they serve. These are the most vulnerable. We're talking about the pensioners. We're talking about the poor. We're talking about the past poor, but we're also talking about the physically challenged, the visually challenged, those that, you know, they say you define a society by how you treat the vulnerable. Well, I want you to take a look at this and see how we would define how the ministry is handling the vulnerable. So taxpayers have spent $49.2 billion over a period of 7 years. And in 2017-18, the Auditor General is telling us that her office, neither the Parliament of Jamaica, has received any reports in terms of how that $49.2 billion was spent. And that is significant. 7 years of being in the dark about whether or not the money was spent, where the Parliament said it should go, in the manner that it should go, and whether or not it has actually achieved the outcome for which it was to be spent. Below that, we have 70.4 million reallocated to salaries without the Ministry of Finance's approval. There's such a thing called environment policy in the ministry that basically explains that you really just can't start to shift around a budget. You get 100 million to spend for the year. You can't go back to the ministry and say, well, I only spent 100 million, but you know, took 20. That's supposed to go to investments and I pay salaries. It doesn't work like that for many reasons. But here we have one instance where 70.4 million was spent in precisely in the way it is not supposed to be. We get to 2018-19, 592 million, that's $500 million now. What's happening again? A repetition of what happened with that 70.4, but do you see how much it has ballooned? Again, approved by the Permanent Secretary without the Ministry of Finance's approval. We have 172 million unspent for PATH, which is a little mind-boggling because we think this is an area that needs money, but we have the money and it hasn't been used. But what's even worse, that money, if not spent at the end of a financial year, is to be returned to what we call the Consolidated Fund, which is the big treasury where all of our monies go. I believe, based on the report that the Permanent Secretary told the Auditor General, that these were stale-dated checks, but up until this day, the AG has not been able to get the evidence to substantiate that that 72 million is in fact stale-dated checks or where that money actually ended up. Let's go to 2018, the National Insurance Fund. Between 2015 and 2017, invested, procured, bought shares. It's in 19 companies, and yes, you're reading that figure correctly, totaling $3.08 billion without the internal investment committee benefit of their approval, without the board's approval, and without the Ministry of Finance's approval. I want you to take that in because when I was in government, and I think it's still the case now, I think the threshold is still $60 million. You cannot spend $60 million without the Cabinet of Jamaica approving it. Now, the report doesn't state whether or not the Cabinet did, but that is a very egregious thing to have happened without the board, the PS, and without the ministry's approval. But we go on. We get now to this year's recent report, the 2019-20 report filed in December before the PAC now. The ministry had its last sitting in front of the PAC yesterday. What are they looking at? We're here again. $76.81 million reallocated in the budget by the PS without the ministry's approval. We learned that there are 60 systemic issues all the way back to 2017. The internal auditor has been advising the ministry of it, but the Auditor General is stating that the management has been unresponsive. And two last points on this matter. Remember, we spoke about the National Insurance Fund in 2018, spending $3 billion without approval. And I know you're wondering, how can that happen and people still be at their desks? I'm wondering the same. But again, 2 years later, this current AG's report is telling us that 187 million has been transferred again from the National Insurance Fund to one of their resort management companies without the board's approval and without the permanent secretary's approval. $99 million spent buying capital goods, and I'm quoting the AG here. Despite multiple internal and external audit reports, there are no accurate records of assets acquired. What that means? That when the assets come in, the assets can walk out because there's no record of what came in and who it was allocated to and when. And they do walk. And last, between 2012 and 2014, we have approximately there $66 million that was paid to a consultant. Now, the contract was only for 2012 for 8 months, but they worked until 2014. So there's no contract in place for the next 2 years of work. And finally, between April to December of 2017, over a span of less than a year, $50 million was spent on 5 suppliers for janitorial and security services with no contract in place. That's putting at risk the people's money. There's nothing to hold them to account for failure to perform or anything of that nature. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I went into the granular of it because this is what JAMP spends a lot of its time doing, combing into the weeds. But it's only when you get into the weeds, and this is not even the weeds, this is just a small bit of what the Auditor General reports have to say about one ministry of government and an agency that reports to it. The question in your mind is probably, what is the permanent secretary saying in response to this? And I'll just share 2 quickly with you. She has advised the Public Accounts Committee that a specialist procurement unit and a property management maintenance unit has been established in response to these concerns and has been staffed. So a procurement committee that exists is still in place. And the response is that we have had to hire a specialist procurement unit, staff them, spend more money in order to get civil servants to understand that you are supposed to sign a contract when you hire someone. It doesn't seem very plausible to me as a reasonable remedy. And last, with regards to the 187 million that the NIF had transferred without approval, without the permanent secretary's knowledge, the PS advised that the ministry has implemented new procedures, that the advisory board and the permanent secretary has to approve all transfers. What is interesting about that response is that this already exists as a requirement in the FAA Act. That's the act that governs the Ministry of Finance and the financial operations of all ministries. So it's deeply concerning for a citizen oversight body to hear a permanent secretary responding on how she intends to correct these breaches by sharing by sharing policies that already exist, and also by basically putting another layer of bureaucracy in terms of procurement that I'm not convinced is really going to be a bullseye in dealing with the problem. So what I've just done is to try and share with you how those headlines that we shared in my first presentation, showing you decade after decade, how it continues to revolve without any solutions, because this is just one of many examples of how the cycle just continues to continue. AG reports, PS comes before Parliament, makes promises which already exist, and we start the cycle all over again. This is a quote from a Public Accounts Committee member that really stayed with me, that I'd like to stay with you. This is the quote coming back from 2008, but it fits perfectly what I just shared with you coming from MLSS. The member had said in a meeting, we cannot have the repetition of this kind happening every year. It just continues in department after department, and if you were to add it up, you will know that you cannot run your business like that. I couldn't run my business like that. And I think therein lies the problem. It's a part of human nature that when it's not yours and you're not feeling it in your pocket, you really have to have some serious guardrails set up and a governance system in place to help people to do the right thing. Now, in closing, I just want us to remember that the Parliament is there to really provide three main duties for us. And this is where, if you remember in the beginning of my first presentation, we say JAMP, the PSOJ, we're working to strengthen the accountability mechanisms in the Parliament. And we're starting there because it's the seat of accountability. That's where our elected representatives are. But I want to share with you and remind you that we focus a lot on the work they do in the constituency. And as important as that is, I believe that the bulk of the work lies in the Parliament. And if they are getting it right there, then you'll be surprised to see that they don't have as much to do in the constituency. And I can make those dots connect for you at another point in time. But the functions of Parliament is to represent the electorate in many different ways, including in the constituency. Passing laws, and this is one of the most important laws. They pass it every year. It's actually the budget. I lived too long before I knew that the budget is actually a piece of legislation known as the Appropriations Act. Now, once the Parliament or representatives have passed that law that allocates, this year it will be $1.2 trillion. Yes, that's a lot of money. 830 in central government, the balance in the public companies. They now need to do what? Number 3 says it, oversee the spending of that money to ensure that we get value for money. Now, I'm just gonna join with Trevor in just speaking quickly to some issues and some gaps that we have discovered in the Parliament that we're gonna ask citizens to use this tool to help us to close these gaps. As it relates to monitoring, one quick example, we have currently 6 commissions of Parliament, and you're familiar with them. These are very important organs of the state. These bodies are established to address matters of varied national concern. They are independent of the government, the executive. They report directly to the Parliament. Now, I got in touch with the Parliament about maybe a month ago, and I asked the question, when these reports come in, who is responsible to monitor and to oversee what's happening with the Children's Advocate, with all the issues that we're having in the common, etc.? I still have not been able to get an answer because the Parliament has not been able to tell me exactly which committee or whose desk once it has been brought to the Speaker of the House. And that for me is extraordinarily troubling. In addition to that, you are already familiar with the, I would say well, how much is this? The 6 most important oversight committees. The 2 most important being the public accounts and the public administration and appropriation, because they're directly overseeing some of the issues that I shared with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. But you might have heard JAMP sharing that for the last 15 years, despite the faithful sitting of those 2 committees, an annual report that is prepared, that is supposed to go back to the Parliament for them to discuss as our elected representatives, come to a conclusion with those recommendations in the report, send that up to the Cabinet for those decisions now to flow back down to the ministries, to the permanent secretaries, is not happening for the very simple reason that though the reports are faithfully provided every year by these 2 committees of MPs, bipartisan, both parties sitting on it, there's not once where we've been able to find where these reports make it to the agenda of the House to be discussed. Now, you have seen some of the issues pertaining to the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. That warrants the attention of the Parliament, has never made it to the agenda. The last 4, these are the ones that the Prime Minister in September decided should not be chaired by the opposition. There were howls from civil society. There were concerns, but the Prime Minister insisted that because it was being chaired by the opposition, they were actually blocking the progress of many policies and programs. And therefore, the switch took place. Well, JAMP was informed only this week that we have, since September when that decision was made, 195 reports, and I'm talking about annual reports from our public bodies and these commissions of Parliament between September and yesterday, 195. And if I were to ask you how many of these committees have sat, the answer would be 1. So these are some of the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, why the headlines continue, just in case that you have always wondered. It has everything to do with the quality of representation and monitoring going on in the House of Parliament. JAMP believes that that is the place we want to start, by educating the citizens and also even educating the new parliamentarians. We have had 20 of them. Everton has demonstrated to us that where there is will, We started out looking at political will. Where there is will, it can be done. So we are basically making a call to all the citizens here. And as we continue for another year and 2 months in this project partnership with the PSOJ and the EU, we would like you to come on board, because at the end of the day, like I said, final checks and balances are really the people of Jamaica. These kinds of gaps are really just asking our parliamentarians to do exactly what the NHF said to its staff. You are getting paid to deliver a particular service. There has been delinquency. The people of Jamaica are asking you to step up to the plate. And most importantly now, because in the time of COVID, we need every single dollar that we can to continue giving the services and to respond to the health crisis, which has become an economic and a financial crisis. So thank you very much for your time today. And I hope this presentation has also been of some use in letting you know that it's not all lost, but we do have our work cut out for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. That it was indeed very comprehensive and managed to pull everything together that we would have spoken about today, looking at, you know, what is actually happening in the national context, what is being done, what has been done, and what we need to do as entities who are championing governance and accountability and transparency, what it is that we need to do. We don't have a lot of time left, but we do want to facilitate some questions from the people who have stayed with us, and we thank you so much for staying and listening attentively to these presentations. So I'm going to ask persons who wish to ask a question to either use a raised hand feature or to drop a question in the chat. We did get a question from a member of the media who had to hop off earlier, so I'm going to ask that question on his behalf. And that question was to both yourself, Jeanette, and Professor Monroe. His question is for both entities. JAMP, you've been around for about 4 years, NIA about 10 years. What has been the greatest challenge, both of you, both entities, that you've been facing in getting a greater level of governance accountability in the public sector?
Trevor, you first. Unmute.
You're muted, Professor.
I was saying that I thought it was ladies before gentlemen, but I don't mind going first. Yeah, I think there are a number of issues which have been the greatest challenge. I would, number one, say that getting our citizenry to be more active, to be more engaged, to be more assertive in saying to the public authorities, this is wrong and you need to do it right. And to sustain that engagement has been an extraordinary challenge, and not surprisingly so, because Jamaica's development seems to proceed in cycles. There are long periods when citizens are not willing or able to get engaged. We had a period like that in the 1930s. Marcus Garvey tried his very, very best for years and years, felt that he got nowhere just when he got somewhere. He left the island in despondency in the late 30s. And after he left, the seeds he planted flourished in the national protests, which gave us our modern political system. And again, the 1950s were periods of passivity. The 1960s, young people again became active and assertive. And so what we're seeing is we're in that downturn now. And this is a time when NIA and JAMP have to plant the seeds of awareness. If we don't see them sprouting right away, we know they will. It's a matter of watering and nurturing and fertilizing. So that has been a big challenge, getting the tens of thousands of Jamaicans who feel dissatisfied. And you hear it in the talk shows, you see it in people's mood and manner. That is a challenge, and we have to sustain the effort to deal with it. The second one is, of course, funding, to put fuel in the engine to be able to keep up the necessity to build awareness. It costs quite a bit of money to do the comprehensive multimedia work, and as well to sustain the training programs among young people in the communities, violence prevention. So that has been a second challenge. Our international partners have been very generous, and some of our national businesses equally so. I'm sure there will be more, particularly as a result of this webinar that the PSOJ and JAMP have arranged. Those two challenges we have to deal with, and we have to recognize that changing Jamaica, as my late learned professor taught me when I was very much young and hot in the collar. He said to me, Trevor, this is Professor Rex Nettleford. I know, you guys are really wanting to change Jamaica, but please understand that changing Jamaica for the best is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And he added, how many times have we won an Olympic medal in over 1,600 meters? But it's not 1,600 meters, it's not 100 meters, it's 26 miles. And that keeps many of us going, in that we know that the seeds are being planted, they will sprout, but maybe not immediately. That is the challenge, to sustain the effort and to be aware, even when you don't see the results you'd wish, that something is happening. And if you listen to our musicians, the conscious ones, you'll see that something is going on amongst the younger generation. They're not just being apathetic, but they're working things out in their own minds as to how they can engage in a manner that brings a better life for all. A bit long, but you touch my corn.
Thanks, Professor.
I think Prof is right, but I think Prof is right. Funding for the kind of interventions that NIA and JAMP does. I grew up with a group of advocates that really believed in empirical data. Research was at the core. And so you need time to do research, you need to build capacities and competencies, and so the funding is crucial. But I would still actually say it's a mindset that is the biggest challenge. And that is to get Jamaicans to really believe that the issue, for instance, of corruption, in my mind, it's not as intractable. It's a very different animal from corruption. I saw nothing of what I'm looking at in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security that cannot be fixed. And that cannot even be fixed overnight if the will was there. My faith, though, is really not so much looking at the politician, it's looking at the people of Jamaica. And I think that if we can empower them with information, the more they begin to understand it, is the less complicated the problems will look. And when they look less complicated, I think it will trigger a response from the inside for them to engage. Because if a problem don't look as big, then the chances that people will engage will increase. And that's basically what happened for me. I learned how to read the budget of Jamaica. That's why I want to teach everybody how. And I learned to understand more about the parliament. And if I hadn't learned those two things, and it never have nothing to do with going to you guys, right? I studied architecture. It's just simply applying yourself. It's learning that it's not that difficult that gave me the courage to think I should step in and engage. So, Cloleen, if we can educate the public and change the mindset about how they think this thing is difficult, then I think that Trevor is going to be a sprinter, not so much a marathon. That's my hope.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. And I think that also echoes what Mr. Anderson said in his presentation, that governance is about the journey. It's a journey, not a destination. So, we have to understand that we're in this thing for the long haul, not just an overnight transformation. All right, do we have any?
And a reminder, Cloleen, JAMP is not even 2 years old. I think we said 4. We are barely 2. So
Carol, question us. Mr. David?
Yes, hi.
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Still morning?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Excellent presentations. Thank you very much. I've raised it before at our governance committee at the PSOJ, and I'd like to raise it again in terms of, we are obviously not short on the issues, the Auditor General's reports, and you just mentioned a number of other reports which are out there. I'm an auditor, so I know the audit process. The issue normally is, where is the bottleneck, right? Because the issues are there. And what you do is quite right to get it out there, people understanding what they are. But where's the bottleneck? And I think that's one of the things we need to kind of focus on. You said they are raised at the PAC, And from there, what? You know, I think we also need to get a good understanding why it's not going further, you know, and there are some trends that we see over the years. So are we able to say what are some of these key things and for proper action to be taken at the appropriate level? I just wanted to just note that, because that is obviously one of the things that's a problem now. Where is the bottleneck? Why? What can be done?
Well, in all fairness, David, and I say in all fairness, Trevor kind of touched on it. I have asked and inquired of the staff of Parliament and some MPs, and the first thing you tend to hear is that the agenda of the business of the day, you know, as a country, you know, you're running, is the biggest company. So as Trevor said, if you start that meeting at 2 o'clock and you're only meeting once, and the meeting going to end at probably around 5, 6 o'clock, how many issues can you cover? There's a whole heap of issues to deal with. You have 146 public companies and 14 ministries with a lot going on. So what tends to happen is that these reports by the committees like a PAC and a PAAC, they can't make it onto the agenda, and even if they make it, they drop off because there's so many other things. That's what we are told. But I am saying, if you recognize the loss of what is it, Trevor, $96 billion a year, yeah, 5% of our GDP, as Trevor says, then let's have more sittings of the House. Let's start a little bit earlier. To me, it's easy to find Drano to plug into that bottleneck to free it up. But that's what I've been told is the apparent concern.
If I could make a quick comment, I don't, Trevor's going to make a point, Professor Monroe.
Yeah.
And then I'll make a comment after.
If I could, to what Janet said, which is absolutely on target. First thing is that it's good for us to analyze that political will is what often is failing or fracture between competitors who want to get a one-up on the other. But I think we need to add two other wills to that. Social will, which is the public, and professional will, which are the David Hall, which are the judges, the prosecutors, the members of the Integrity Commission. If we can get those three aligned, and political will responds to the social will, if people speak out, sustain it, and do so in a manner that's effective, then we'll get that political will stronger than it is. And we've seen a number of occasions of that in the past, episodic but not sustained. That 95 billion that Jenny refers to, we need to get a perspective of what that involves. You know. The third supplementary estimate of expenditure for 2021, the budget for the police was 42 billion, right? And we're losing 95 billion every year as a result of corruption and organized crime. The budget for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, 80 billion. So just saving a fraction of that loss could significantly deal with some of the issues that I want us to know. The public servants who are working their butt off, nurses and teachers in the current pandemic, and who are being offered 1% or 1.5% improvement in their emoluments. These are the kinds of relationships that the public needs to better understand, so that corruption and accountability are not just abstract things, but things that actually impact their daily lives if they were to do practice it more effectively. So again, when you look at the data, and one of the things that JAMP and we're evidence-based, we're data-driven. I'd ask anybody on this webinar just to go online and see how many times other parliaments meet in comparable jurisdictions. The Ghanaian, India, New Zealand, which is a small state. And you ask ourselves, why are we in a situation where 45, with the breaks, the summer break, and Easter break, and so on, meeting a Tuesday afternoon and a Friday morning is clearly not adequate. And the only way it's going to change if more voices say, you guys need to meet more regularly to deal with our business. So many things get put back. The Public Management Accountability Act, that's the regulations, a clear example. Both sides agree this thing is urgent. The Minister of Finance, to his credit, pushed it through the House. It's stalled now. What does that require? That the boards that Jenny spoke about and which have been underperforming by virtue of their jurisdiction and management. These boards would first of all be drawn in significant measure from a skills bank. There'll be a limit on how many boards any individual could serve on. There'll be a limit on how long you can serve. There'll be a limit on how far the chairman could be, multiplying their chairmanships across boards. And very importantly, as is happened in the BOJ Act, what the minister described as a revolutionary development, and I agree with him, that board now has a component which has to be a continuity across administrations, so that the entire board don't change, either when the minister or the government changes. So I just think these are things that can be done, that should be done, but the missing link is sustained citizen engagement, which is one of the critical elements of good governance, citizen participation, and insufficient mechanisms to have that participation and engagement have an impact.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think that's a great place to end today's conversation. There's so much more that we could talk about. I'm sure we have many other questions. I saw Mrs. Narcisse making a comment in the chat about the Partnership for Prosperity. There's so many other elements to the conversation that we could continue, but unfortunately, time does not allow today. So I'm going to just thank our presenters, Ms. Jeanette Calder from JAMP, Professor Monroe from NIA, Mr. Anderson from NHF, and Mr. Egveld from European Union. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules to make some excellent presentations today. And I think everybody has learned something new, and even Jeanette has been inspired inspired by Mr. Anderson's presentation to keep championing the cause. And I'm sure Professor Monroe too has got a little fuel for his marathon. So I thank everybody who has joined us and who has stayed for today's presentation. We appreciate that. And for those who were not able to join, you can let them know that the presentation will be available on the PSOJ's YouTube channel. So that's the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica YouTube channel. The entire proceeding can be watched there later today. So thanks everyone. Keep safe and do have a great rest of the week.
Thank you for having us, really appreciate it. Really, I learned a lot too, and congrats to the NHF and everything. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.